now that you are a proactive parent, you're moving towards these conversations, be mindful of like what's going on. And unfortunately, with like the way the technology world is that we're raising our kids in, things are going to come up, so instead of shying away from topics that maybe come up in your school or your neighborhood, move towards them, kind of discuss at the dinner table or on the way to basketball practice or whatever. Like, okay, I heard there was a group, the seventh graders were sending nudes. How do you feel about that? Well, dive into that conversation, enter in, let them hear your voice on that topic instead of shying away from it. Because I think it's very important as parents, our kids need our voice on this topic. And they don't need us to be like, oh gosh, my mom would never mention that because it's so uncomfortable. Like, let them know, like, man, always lead with empathy.
This is the episode where the moms from the Birds and Bees are back to answer all of your questions about how to have the sex talk with your kids and how we can talk about our bodies. Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Paula Ferris Show. I'm your host, Paula. So just a little forewarning, this is not a dirty or inappropriate conversation by any stretch of the imagination. But if you got little ones within earshot, just listen to the conversation first to determine whether or not you think it's appropriate for your kids at their particular age. I'm that mom, so I always say go for it, but I want to be respectful of your boundaries and just give you a heads up. So we have been having tough conversations on the podcast, how to talk politics with our kids, how to talk sex with our kids. The conversation we had a couple of weeks ago with America's government teacher, Sharon McMahon, about how to talk politics with our kids, family, and friends is one that I'm really leaning on right now. Whether you're hopeful or helpless after the election, I think what Sharon said, that we need to learn from one another, that the goal can't be to always agree. The goal should be to learn. That's something called critical thinking that we need to develop in our kids. We cannot develop critical thinking unless we are really presented with opposing viewpoints. And she said, when it comes to viewpoints, if we think our viewpoint is the only viewpoint, that's a form of moral narcissism and moral superiority. So again, I encourage you to go back and listen to that conversation. I actually have. It's been really helpful for me and how to have some of these tough conversations with friends, family, and my children. Okay, so the moms, Megan and Mary Flo from Birds and Bees, are back to answer all of your questions. You had questions, Jennifer and Nicole and Gabby and Robin, Barbara, Brandon, Diana, and Karen. These questions were awesome. You wanted to know about how we talk about our bodies. When should our kids stop bathing with one another? Should we walk around naked in front of our kids? And is America over-sexualized? How do we have the sex talk when we have special needs kids? How much of our own experience should we share with our children? And again, this conversation changes when your kids are older. So how do you continue these conversations and effectively have these conversations when you have teenagers? I have 2 teenagers, so I'm all ears as to what Mary Flo and Megan have to say about how to have this conversation when your kids are a little bit older. Okay, you're probably really uncomfortable with these conversations in general, but that's why I am here to have these conversations for you and ask the really, really awkward and uncomfortable questions. Without further ado, Mary Flo and Megan, the moms from Birds and Bees. And make sure you stick around to after the conversation to hear my takeaways. Are you ladies ready to answer some questions from our listeners?
Go for it.
We have quite a few, and it'll range from young kids to older kids, okay, that are trying to have that conversation or the conversations again. So Jennifer says, help. My kindergartner came home and said a friend told him that sex means you get pregnant. What do you tell Jennifer?
Well, sex, you can get pregnant from having sex, but let me first back it up and explain to you what sex is. Now, what I want you to know is you have to gauge your child on what they already know. Sex is a grown-up word and sex is a grown-up activity. But let me tell you, it does have to do with how babies come about. So let's start talking about how babies come about. It starts with a seed and an egg. So you can back up the story. You don't have to just react to, well, this is what happened, so I need to move from here and go forward. You can start there and move backwards. So if your child doesn't know that there's a seed deep inside of the daddy and an egg deep inside of the mommy, you can say, well, it actually starts with the mommy and the daddy who have a seed and an egg, and that seed and egg have to meet in order to start the baby. And the way they meet, that act is called sex.
And then do you get graphic and say, like, this is where, like, how in depth do you get?
I think,
I
think some parents say, well, do I have to say the penis goes in the vagina? And I think obviously at some point, yeah, that is sex, right? Does this sweet Jennifer have to tell this to her kindergartner day one? No. To Mary Flo's point is that will happen later. That's not appropriate to jump into that if he has no previous knowledge. So back it up. Start with seeds and eggs. Start with this understanding. You know what? Your friend's right. Sex does make babies sometimes. And leave it like that, because we no longer have this pressure to, that's it. I have to tell him every single thing. I want him to know about sex because he asked, and this is my one shot. It's like, no, that's gone. I'm going to start by saying that's right. And babies come from seeds and eggs. Okay. Did you want to finish your TV show before dinner, or can you put this at the table? We can move on because we know we will go back to that later over the years. There's no longer this pressure for sweet Jennifer to be like, well, this is it. I guess it's going to happen at 5.
Right.
Go back.
Like you said, it's a series of talks.
Yeah.
And the goal is not perfection. It is being purposeful. Is it easier to have it like not face to face? Like you just said, maybe you're doing the dishes or you're doing something like, do you have to have it eye to eye? Because that's intimidating, especially for boys. They don't like eye to eye contact. Do you recommend having this conversation while you're engaged in something, while you're doing something?
Yes. Absolutely. Like folding the clothes, going on a walk, back to the car, shoulder to shoulder is basically is better than face to face.
Okay, that's good.
Sure.
In front of the fireplace, and you're both looking at the fire, where think of a triangle, something else is involved in what you're looking at.
Oh, I like that. Think of a triangle, something else is involved. I like that, Mary Flo. Okay, and some of these, we've already answered in our earlier conversation, but we'll loop back. Nicole says, how do you even begin to have the conversation? Our oldest is 7 and I am terrified. And you said earlier, your family is the age of your oldest child. So if her oldest is 7, right? That's how she should be treating the rest of her children. But for Nicole, whose oldest is 7, she doesn't even know where to start, how to begin to have it. What would you tell her?
I would start with anatomically correct words for body parts. So you introduce words penis and vagina if you haven't done so already. And again, just like everything else, those are words that you want to start using in your home. These are not words that you just want to say like private or call it, your
hoo-ha, wee-wee,
whatever wee words you like to use. Like, get rid of that and start, sweetheart, did you know that's actually called your vagina? It's a private part. So sometimes we'll refer it as your privates, but that's what the doctor calls it. That's the actual word, and just start incorporating that. So these are not bad words, because what happens so often with body parts is we either enhance the silliness that kids naturally have. Every parent listening is like, well, no joke. My kids like to be silly about private parts. 2 boys also, and penis is funny. And I think it might be funny.
They like to draw them.
Yeah. Yes.
My son drew one on a sympathy card for something.
So no, exactly. It's just a funny joke. And so if we are only using those silly words, we're kind of enhancing this idea that, yeah, they are silly. But then the opposite is true. If we are only referring to it as a kind of the private, everything else has a body part, and that has a body part has a name, right? Head, shoulders, knees and toes, elbows, earlobes, knuckles, everything has a name. And so if we are just isolating those parts to be kind of figurative, that's creating shame around those parts. And really, ultimately, the most important thing we're doing with these words is creating safety from abuse situations. And so that's very heavy. But what we're trying to show you is that kind of turn the lights on and be like, these are what these parts are. These are the boundaries for these parts. And if something happens, come and tell me. Because what happens so often is we make it such a gray area where it doesn't really have a name except for the silly Willy name. Or sometimes we just try to whisper. They don't know what to do if a line was to be crossed. Well, my mom doesn't say those words. We don't talk about this. We just want this to be something that we talk about in our homes. So where to start with a 7-year-old, I would say start with anatomically correct words and then start kind of with this idea about seeds and eggs. It's a really easy way to start.
That's really, really good advice.
Also, the birth story is such a great story. So maybe you have a friend or a teacher or a neighbor who's having a baby. Take that 7-year-old with you to take them a meal or a card or, baby gift. And then on the way home in the car, have you ever wondered how that baby got out of there? So just let them see these things that are happening that sometimes 7-year-old boys are not paying attention to or are aware of. But also, when we say that these are the body parts, we need to attach also the word, and these are private parts. And we need to explain, what does private mean? Like you might say, do you realize these are private? And they might nod their heads and say yes, but you have to give that a definition. This is a part of your body that other people don't look at, touch, or take pictures of.
And that's a really good clarification and a really good note, Mary Flo. Gabby says, do you have it when your boys or girls become interested in others sexually, or they start noticing one another? When do you have it? And I know you're going to say there's not one age. So how do you want to answer that?
I would say, kind of repeating everything we've already said, you want these conversations to happen as naturally as possible, to have multiple conversations, because I think it's also important for parents to remember when you're having these conversations, and let's say you did it, you explained the mechanics using penis and vagina and what sexual intercourse is, you did the whole shebang, and this person's, your child's 9, let's give it an age. That 9-year-old is not hearing that information the same way that you as an adult who is probably sexually active, probably bringing some baggage to the table with this topic, uncomfortable, nervous, sensual, post-pubescent person. So when we have these conversations, whoosh, a lot is coming to the forefront of our mind. Our 9-year-old, 10-year-old, 11, whatever year old is not hearing that in the exact same way. These prepubescent kids are hearing that information, and most likely their response is going to be gross.
Right. Yeah.
That's okay, because we can meet them with their age appropriate response and say something like, oh yeah, I understand why you would feel that way. It's not for kids. It's just for grown up.
Okay.
And so we don't have to say, oh, no, it's God's design. It's so beautiful. Or like, oh no, it's a special way. We don't have to force them to have this understanding because they're not ready for that. And so I think it's helpful for parents to hear that sometimes when you do explain what sex is, they're not connecting these dots all the time. Like they're not thinking, wow, that must be kind of like, they're just like, okay.
It's kind of mechanical.
Yeah.
And you don't have to talk about the dangers of sexual intercourse or the potential dangers. You don't have to talk about the pleasures. When they're young, later on, when their puberty is dawning and all of this is starting to happen, you can talk about the powerful things that are consequences of sex. But early on, it's just the mechanics. It's just giving them accurate information from a loving parent who also has a message. Yeah.
Okay. I like that. So Diana, who has 3 children, she's actually a friend of mine. She has a 5-year-old. Her daughter, I think, is 3, and then she has a 1-year-old. So she says, how do you know when your kid is ready to give more when it comes to where do babies come from? She has a 5-year-old, incredibly smart, precocious, and perceptive. He knows that babies come out of my tummy through my vagina, but we've only ever shared that God put the baby there to begin with. So how do you know when your kid is ready for more?
Well, first, Diana, we would say that baby is not in your tummy. That baby is in a special place called the uterus.
Okay.
And so we are here to clear the air. We are getting babies out of the digestive system and into the reproductive system. So we are encouraging parents saying, no, baby's in a special place. If you're incorporating your faith in your conversations, which some families want to do, you can use a phrase, by God's design. By God's design, there is a special place next to mommy's tummy and that God designed for babies to grow in, and it's called a uterus. And only mommies have a uterus. Kind of backing it up. Now, some people are like, are you kidding me? I cannot say. But you can, you really can. And like, are we like stricklers, rule followers like, you said tummy. No, my kids know the word uterus. They know the word womb. And sometimes they will still say, oh man, that woman's, got that big old baby in her tummy. I'm not correcting them all the time. But they know the word uterus. They know the word or womb. Some people prefer that word. It's easier to say and from the Bible. So your sweet little friend, is it Diana? Is that right?
Diana, yes.
Yes. Diana. But now she wants to know that the kids know that the babies are in the uterus. Get the babies where they belong. And then I think you don't need to put yourself on a timeline. I think so often this generation of parenting, myself included, tell me what to say and when to say it. Like, I want to get this right. I wouldn't put any pressure on yourself to be, okay, well, definitely by the time they get to 2nd grade, I would just like, be mindful of these conversations. Our course walks through so many opportunities to have little conversations about birth, seeds and eggs, body parts, body boundaries, even protecting against online pornography, using phrases about good pictures and bad pictures. There's so many little conversations you can have that we're almost missing a lot of information if we're only focused on that penis goes into the vagina. There's so much more around this.
So uncomfortable to even say.
I know.
No, but
You get used to it.
and my daughter, my middle child, was very curious about how that baby got in there when we were having our third. She was very curious about how that baby got in there. And she was constantly asking me, but she was not quite 5. Like she was just a few weeks from 5. And I thought, okay, I cannot pick up that big, heavy book called Sex and drop it on her head. I'm just not ready for that. And so you can give a vague illustration right at first. Once they know that there are seeds and eggs, well, deep inside of daddy, there's a seed called the sperm, and deep inside of mommy, there's an egg, and the seed and the egg have to meet. And the husband and the wife fit together in a special way. And when they fit together in that way, the seed and the egg meet, and that's what God uses to start the baby.
Okay. Yeah. So always start with
step 1.
That's step 1. That's just starting to pull back the curtain a little bit. Instead of the whole book, you're introducing the characters.
Yes, I like that. And that's so good. It's introduce the characters. Here's scene 1. Here's the next chapter. So you can just, again, start with anatomically correct words, the seed, the egg, and you don't have to.
You got it.
And that's
that's it for scene 1. Scene 1 done. Scene 2 can be another time.
Depending on the child, conversation might last a couple years. And that's okay too. You know your child. And that's why we really want to empower parents, because nobody knows your child better than you do.
Or loves them more.
Or cares about them. You know, so it's like, you know them to say, you know what, this kid is just gobbles up information and wants all knowledge. I could think he's ready for this and move forward. Or, oh no, she is a chatty Cathy and she's going to tell all her friends. And I don't think we need to know this yet. So we're going to just camp out in the phrase Mary Flo just used for a couple more years. So again, not to get caught up in the right and wrong way to do it, just more of like looking for opportunities to layer, right? We're kind of just building these conversations.
Yeah. And I know Diana's son, he's a sweet boy. If he's curious and he's talking about it with mommy, he's talking about it with other people. So always, like you say, make sure that the conversation's coming from you. And if he's talking about it with you, he's probably talking about it with other people. She had a follow-up. She said, when do kids stop bathing together? Like bodily privacy and stuff? Follow their lead is what I think. That's her question.
Great questions, Diana. We would say respect the most modest person in the home. That's kind of our blanket statement answer for questions about when do siblings stop bathing together? When do parents stop changing or being naked in front of their kids? Modesty levels are going to vary from house to house. There's not a hard, fast rule. Now, for the kids specifically, most often we get this question a lot from families that have both genders. And so let's say brothers and sisters are still taking a bath together. Well, quite frankly, that makes your life as a mom a lot easier. If everybody's okay with it, that's not a big deal. It actually allows for a lot of great conversations. But if you notice, like maybe your son is now 10 and he's kind of voicing a desire for privacy. You know, most kids don't really get privacy until late elementary school-ish. You know, it's like, I don't want to take a bath with my sisters anymore. So whenever that is voiced, try to respect that and say, okay, you know, now that you're 10, you can take a shower by yourself anymore. Now, obviously, this is all pre-body changes, pre-puberty stuff. But if everybody's comfortable with it, it is not a problem. Now, once someone starts to voice their desire for privacy or their physically discomfort, you can kind of tell like they're changing with the door closed or that kind of stuff. Just be mindful of that and respect the most modest person.
What about as parents? Because my dad used to call me an exhibitionist growing up. Like I peed with the door open. Like he's like, Paul, put some clothes on, please. I've just always been.
You're comfortable.
I'm very comfortable in my own skin. My kids have seen me naked. Like they walked in and I try not to oversexualize my body. Like this is my body, right? So how should parents react to that? Is there a time when our kids should stop seeing us naked?
Well, once again, it may be your children who are more modest than you are. So if you see them walk in and kind of maybe back up a little bit or, you know, look down or seem to be like, this is too much information right now, Mom. To say, tell that you are a little uncomfortable. Sweetheart, I don't want to ever make you uncomfortable. Knock on the door and I'll throw a robe on. But when I'm drying my hair in here, I don't have any clothes on. That's because it gets so hot in here or, you know, or I'm very comfortable, but I don't want you to ever be uncomfortable. So I've got a robe right here. You just knock on the door and throw it on.
And what about like walking around the house naked? I know some parents still do that. Would you frown upon that?
I think it just depends on everyone's comfort level. Like if that's, again, this is where, like we have done a lot of polls on Instagram of kind of like gauging everybody's different modesty levels. And our followers, it's grown enough to be kind of an international following. And so it was wild to get all these responses. We had a very high involvement or engagement with this poll. And what the biggest shocker to me was how cultural this was. Typically as Americans, we're like asking ourselves these questions. Well, my son's 8 now, so I guess I'll never, I'll lock all the doors or whatever it is. Like, it's very common. And then you have the one-off family in the USA that's like, oh yeah, no big deal. My parents would like run down the hall in their underwear to get something on the dryer or whatever. And so it's just going to,
that's our family.
Yeah, that's fine. Like if everybody's comfortable with that, that's not a big deal. Modesty levels will vary. But what was so interesting, and you kind of mentioned this earlier in this phrase of, in different cultures, all over the world, they were all very surprised at how modest the American culture was. What are y'all talking about? Like we all go to the baths together. I'm sitting next to my aunt who's naked and so-and-so's. It was really interesting. And it made me think of that phrase you just said of how we have almost sexualized bodies so much.
Yes.
That we're not viewing them as anything else. It's made me pause a bit as a mom who's all of a sudden feeling like a normal American mom. It's like, that's enough. Thank you so much. I'll wear my towel forever now. Just to think about, well, what messages are we sending? And maybe I'm thinking about it too much, but it was just interesting to be like, a body's a body, and a body can do great things, and bodies are meant to look normal, do healthy things. A body is not just a sex vessel. And I feel like sometimes we are almost like falling in line with this understanding that, it is. And so God forbid,
that's all it is.
It's all it is. Yeah. And so it's actually we did a big thing about it last summer, and it really just like made me think a lot through of like
how uncomfortable we are with our bodies.
How interesting. Or I have a girl and a boy. Do I want them to see a normal woman's body and like have that as their understanding? It made me think, which was really interesting. So to go back to the question is, there's no hard fast rule. Some families are going to be really buttoned up and never show anything.
That's their comfort.
And if that's what people are comfortable with. And some people are going to be walking around with their shirts off or changing in front of one another. And that's okay too. But if you have someone who's uncomfortable, be respectful of the most modest person.
That's a really good rule of thumb. But I'm with you. It's a very intriguing conversation, how cultural it is. And I don't want especially my boys to reduce a woman's body to a sexual being.
Right.
Like they walk in, my youngest, he is so unfazed if he walks into the bathroom and I just, got my birthday suit on. He's unfazed. And some people will be like, you're a terrible parent. You shouldn't let him see you. Well, first of all, it's my bathroom. Like you said, Mary Flo. But also like my body is not just a sexual being. It has many functions. And I want him to see that I'm comfortable with that too. So that's a whole conversation.
I was going to say, that's like a whole separate TED Talk of like,
yes.
It was really opening to me to be like, what are we doing? And it just made me view, it was just really insightful, I thought. Of like, we're the problem.
Okay. I think you need to do a deep dive on this, Megan. I really do. Because I think that there's something to be said for that.
It's the of my children.
And I have a girl and 2 boys. You said you have a girl and 2 boys? So same thing. Okay. So Gabby, again, she had a question earlier about when should you have it when they become interested in one another. She said, do you have it again when they're older? And again, it comes back to you guys saying it's not just one talk, it's a series of conversations. So when your kids are older, and again, I have 2 teenagers and I have a 10-year-old as well, who we know has sadly, that's the age that boys become exposed to porn. How do we have these conversations when they're a little bit older, they're a little more mature, they might want to be sexually active, and each family has their boundaries and their guidelines. So how do we have these ongoing conversations when they're a little bit older? What do they sound like?
For a while, it's kind of rinse and repeat. You can have these conversations about how a baby is made. You can talk about sexual intercourse when they're younger. But believe it or not, because you will never forget that moment, they may have forgotten.
Oh, for sure.
Circling back and saying, remember when we talked about exactly how a baby's made? Do you remember that? Yeah, sort of. So don't count on it that they've actually heard you.
Okay.
We'll never forget that if you don't remember.
Are you kidding? It's on my calendar. I'll never.
I'm traumatized by it still.
Right. This day. Be sure that they hear it with different ears as they're getting older and different exposure. Maybe you have a neighbor across the street who just had a baby. Once again, you keep bringing it up. You don't give that big check mark over that topic. You keep bringing it up. But when their bodies are starting to change, upper elementary school, going into possibly middle school, when their friends are starting their periods or starting to have body changes, because sometimes your child is the last one, it seems like, that's the time to start talking about how you are entering a transition time right now. It takes a while, but right now, your body is a child's body. But over the course of the next couple of years, you are going to get an adult. Your body is going to transition, and that's called adolescence or puberty. And that's changing your body, changing a lot of things that are happening emotionally. So once again, it's not just about your body, different responsibilities, different privileges. Your life is going to go through quite a few changes. And let's anticipate that. Let's talk about that. Let's see about that, because it's going to happen differently for your friends than it is for you. But I don't want you to have questions about, why is hair growing here? Or can I shave my legs? Or, all of the hygiene things that have to be addressed, all of the body. Now that you've started, when you start your period, it's often like this, and just help them understand all of those things that are happening. So that's one of the conversations. It almost multiplies in middle school, because now they're more aware of an attraction to someone. But as they get older, you need to talk about sex is for adults. It's an adult decision. And so how do adults make decisions? Maybe you walk through a conversation. Well, how do you decide to do something that can be life-changing? There are a lot of things that go into that. If you have had multiple conversations with your children, this will just be another one of those. And sometimes those deeper conversations need to be around a situation that they're not heavily distracted. Maybe it's on a long car trip, or maybe you do just sort of take like a special day away with them and just say that we've got to cover some multiple subjects today. Anyway, not to then make it so awkward, but once again, you have to anticipate, how do I want this to go? What's the main thing I hope they learn from these next steps of conversations?
I would also add, now that you are a proactive parent, you're moving towards these conversations,
right?
To be mindful of like what's going on. Unfortunately, with like the way the technology world is that we're raising our kids in, things are going to come up. Instead of shying away from topics that maybe come up in your school or your neighborhood, move towards them, kind of discuss at the dinner table or on the way to basketball practice or whatever. Like, okay, I heard there was a group, the seventh graders were sending nudes. How do you feel about that? Well, dive into that conversation, enter in, let them hear your voice on that topic instead of shying away from it. Because I think it's very important as parents, our kids need our voice on this topic. And they don't need us to be like, oh gosh, my mom would never mention that because it's so uncomfortable. Always lead with empathy. Like that must be very hard to be in. I can't imagine how it feels right now. Why do you think this happened? Do you see how disrespectful this was? We believe that those boundaries were crossed, but if that ever happened, I want you to come and tell me, because there's nothing that you could ever do that would make me not love you, blah, blah, blah. Like, but just to be that parent who has that voice that lets them know, like, hey, I'm aware of what's going on around here. That's hard. I see where people could just get confused and swayed into doing things, but man, that is a line that should not be crossed because of this, and this.
So Megan, I want you to fast forward. Your daughter is how old now?
10, almost 11.
Okay. In 6 years, 16, she's dating somebody. And my daughter's 16. She's not dating anybody right now. And she knows, we have certain values. We believe sex is for marriage, but we also know that kids are going to do their thing. How do I even begin to have those conversations? I don't necessarily want you to put yourself in my shoes, but like when they're a little bit older and they're starting to make their own decisions, they're starting to emancipate themselves from us. How much of our family values am I imposing upon her? How much leeway should I give her to just make her own decision too? Because I know I grew up in that purity culture. Sex is good. Sex is great. Save it for your permanent mate. If you had sex before marriage, like you were going straight to hell and you felt so much guilt and shame. I want my daughter to know our family's values, but I also want her to find her own way. I don't know how to navigate it. I'm already rambling. I ramble when I'm uncomfortable, okay? And I'm uncomfortable, okay?
You're doing just great, Paula. Wait, I would focus on this idea, this concept of beauty and boundaries. I mean, that's something we talk about a lot in our course, but sex is a good thing. What was your little chant? Sex is good. Sex is great.
Save it for your permanent mate. That's from my mom. Again, I grew up in the purity culture, right? So
did I. this is a great thing. And this is what we believe it's intended for. But there are boundaries that we believe, if you're a faith-based home, that the Bible has put around it, God has put around it for our benefit, for our protection. Kind of explain the whys behind your rules. There's some quote like rules without relationship leads to rebellion. And I think it's true. It's like, don't do this till you're married. You don't sit close to him on that couch. You better not go parking somewhere or whatever.
Save room for the Holy Spirit. That was always another
Exactly. Whatever. You know, but like, why am I telling you this? It's because sex is really great. It's also very powerful. It's very vulnerable. It actually also leads to babies sometimes. You can get pregnant. You can get diseases. Like, walk through like the reality of the situation at hand. So these are adult decisions. I am not going to be with you in these moments that you are making decisions. You are old enough. But I'm going to tell you why I believe what I believe and why I am looking out for your best interests. So this is something that's really good in its appropriate times. But these are the boundaries for it. And so if you step outside these boundaries, it could be destructive. It could be hurtful. It could be dangerous. It could be risky behavior, emotionally and physically. And so this is why I care so much about this for you, because this is what's at stake. Ultimately, this is up to you. And so this is something I just want you to understand the reality of what's at stake here as you make these decisions moving forward. Now, then it goes into, well, this is our home. These are our rules. No one's allowed upstairs, or the doors are open, or, you know, whatever rules you have in your home. But I think as far as understanding goes, we owe our kids the full picture here. You can't just say, don't have sex till you're married, or you're not doing this under my roof, or whatever your rules are. We have to say why. Or else we're going to sound like just dumb parents who don't get it, Mom. You have to say, well, this is why we're doing this. These are the boundaries that are intended to protect you, not because we're like old school parents.
Exactly. And those boundaries are really created to help the beauty flourish. That's why they were there, to protect you and to make sure that the beauty of the sexual act can flourish in its intended place. And you can talk about other things that are beautiful, but then they're destructive outside of their given place, like the fire in the fireplace. I know a lot of people use that, but like here it is beautiful and we're drawn to it and we're attracted to it, but it is powerful in a destructive way outside of those boundaries. And the forest fire. Yeah, exactly. Or animals that are beautiful to look at, but if you don't have boundaries around them, they could do damage. Explaining all of that without making sex sound terrible or like it's the ultimate thing. People can live their whole life without having sex. You can talk about singleness and how whether you grow up and are single or you grow up and you're married, that does not make you more valuable if you're married. Like if you are a single adult serving the Lord, you'd be just as happy as if you are married and serving the Lord. And then talk about peripheral things like pressure. How do you resist doing something just because someone else wants you to do it? Does that person have your best interest at heart or only their own? Let's start thinking, whose best interest is this serving? Someone that loves you also wants to protect you.
I love that. Someone that loves you also wants to protect you. Someone who loves you. I'm taking copious notes, by the way.
You have our contact information, Paula, if you need them. You can private session.
You can find us. I'll meet you in Greenville.
Please. Yes, ladies. Thank you so much. Robin says, how much of your personal experiences should you share?
Great question. Okay. So we say, now, obviously this is kind of about younger kids. So when your kids are younger, I don't think it's appropriate to share information like that. I think also it's important to remember that your past or whatever happened or didn't happen shouldn't hold you back from speaking to your children in a way that you want to speak to them. This is no longer about you and your past. It's about them and their future. So I think a lot of times people will come to these conversations with history or baggage and kind of like, oh, who am I to talk to my kids about this? I messed up so much. And to have the freedom of, this is no longer about you and your past. It's about them and their future. So you have the freedom and the authority to teach them what you want to teach them. Now, as your kids are getting older, and let's say they're in those high school years with the boyfriend or going to college, or whatever, I think that's appropriate, assuming you've built these little relationships over years. You say, hey, listen, you want to know why I'm all over you about this? It's because I have a lot of regret or I have a lot of hurt. I think there's a powerful way to share some of your stories at the right time. And that we're talking 18, early adulthood, or maybe high school, whatever. But this is not appropriate to an 8-year-old.
Right, for sure.
It's like, my young child asked the other day of like, she was really sad. She's a very sensitive child. And she was asked, like, have you ever smoked a cigarette? No, I have not. Okay, well, I'm not a smoker, but have I smoked a cigarette? Yeah, I have. And I talked about later, yes. In that moment, did I feel like that was appropriate to tell her? No, she was crying, and she would have whatever. It's a bad example,
but also, even in those later conversations, you don't have to spill the beans. No. You don't have to tell every detail.
No.
What I would encourage a parent to do is to say, what did you learn from your past? And share your heart. Mm-hmm. You're asking me a lot of questions about my past, and I'm going to tell you what I learned from my past. You don't have to say, okay, you remember that person that I introduced you to?
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Years
ago. Here's a picture of him. Here he is on Facebook.
Yeah. And
we don't have to get too detailed.
No, the details like, well, and then this happened and this. I like, no, to Mary Flood's point, it's just the takeaway. I wish I had known XYZ. But again, at the right age, they have to be mature enough to hear it. You don't have to be an open book.
And you're not disqualified.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good. Barbara has this question, and we've kind of answered it a little bit in part 1 and also in this Q&A, but she says, what's the successful approach to talking to those that are old enough but too shy to have that conversation? And we talk about respecting the most modest person when it comes to our bodies and our sexuality. But if your kid is too shy, what is a good approach to that when they're older and obviously interested?
There was a single mom that came up to me one time after one of our talks, and she said, I'm a single mom. I have a 12-year-old boy. He is so painfully shy. Every time I try to talk to him, he just goes in his room and closes the door. What do I do? And I said, if it's important to you, you'll find a way, but just know it has to be in little pieces. Like, don't overwhelm him. And I ran into her later and I said, any luck? Any made any progress? And she said, I can't tell you what I did. This is so crazy, but he's a tennis player. And I took him across town and we were going to play tennis. I knew he couldn't lock himself in a room, like we're on a tennis court at a park. And she said, like on a tennis court, there are those benches you can sit on either side. I walked around and we were back to back. And she said, today, there's some things I need to talk to you about. And I'm going to tell you 2 things right now. And then we're going to play a set of tennis. And then we're going to sit back this way. And you're going to ask me one question.
I like that. Okay. And it was shoulder to shoulder, no direct eye contact.
No, I'm just talking into the tennis court. And you're talking into the other tennis court. He was so mad, but he couldn't go anywhere because he was across town. Then they went back, played tennis. I mean, she told me this long story, but I said, that's so great, but are you going to play, now what? Now you have to run across. She said, this is crazy, but he so loves to close the door that we sit on either side of that door.
That is genius, actually.
And he was like, Mom, I only feel comfortable talking about this when I can't see you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it was like,
because boys get intimidated by that eye-to-eye contact. That's why they open up at night when it's dark. They'll let their moms in the room, shoulder to shoulder. Smart. They can't see one another like directly. So that's smart.
Well, embrace that. I would just embrace the shyness and give it little pieces and give them the space where they're comfortable.
I think so often parents like, well, God, he's just so shy. He's not even thinking about it. He's not even asking questions.
Oh, he's thinking about it.
And he's thinking about it. So I would say, bulldozer is such a strong word. So maybe that's not the right one, but just continue to move forward. I just give that mom so much credit. She didn't let it go. This is really important to me. It's important to me to get this information to you from my mouth. And so we're going to figure this out. Just because the kid's not asking questions doesn't mean they're not inwardly curious. Talk to them. Hey, listen, I know you don't want to talk about this, but this is so important that you're going to have to hear it from me. So if you want to sit in the dark, we can do that. We can walk around the block. You can sit in the back seat, but just don't give up. I love that mom just kept pursuing that conversation.
It's so important in little pieces. The last question is from Karen. She says, how do you approach these conversations for special needs kids? Are they any different?
Yes. I think it just depends on where they are developmentally. And that's maybe the answer to that for these specific questions. But I think I would treat them obviously as their age is not going to probably reflect their peers' ages. Okay. So if you're having conversation, your kid's 10, where are they developmentally? Are they a 5-year-old?
Okay.
And I would really lean into that information or that kind of range. The ages might be off in some of these conversations.
Okay. And then I would be very aware of when they're going through puberty. They will have normal attractions and it might frighten them a little bit, or they need a little extra coaching on how to react when they see, if it's a young boy and he wants to be very affectionate with a girl, they need to know some of the boundaries and manners about that. So socially they can adapt to their changing body and their changing hormones. Our heart goes out to parents with special needs, and they've been loving and watching and caring over their children on this topic or on any topic. They've been looking out for them, preparing the way for them. And so just anticipate that you'll be preparing the way for them in this realm also. And just be aware of when their bodies start changing or they start to have attractions.
You ladies, you've been such a gift. Thank you so much for just blessing us with these conversations and really just sharing your knowledge and wisdom on these topics. Where can people keep up with you? I know you're on Instagram. You have a website. We can buy a training course. There's also a free guide, but where can everyone listening and watching contact you?
So you can follow us on Instagram. It's at birds__bees. And then our website is birds-bees.com. And I'll follow up with you, Paula. We can give you guys a discount code. So our online course, it's our website, birds-bees.com. And then we'll have a code for listeners for 20% off if you want to watch the course. It's
amazing.
It takes 75 minutes. We guarantee you will watch the course and finish it feeling like, I can do this.
You will be that excited.
You will be excited. So if you're this whole conversation thought, wow, I'll never be able to do that. Yes, you can. And we can help you. Don't settle for this fear and dread, because our kids need.
They really do. And I love your passion for this whole topic too. So somebody's got to do this. And I'm so glad it's the two of you.
You're gonna win. Yeah.
Oh, well, God bless you, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, having Paula. It's great. Bye.
Okay, everybody, we can stop sweating now. The Q&A is effectively over. But thank you to Mary Flo and Megan from Birds and Bees for being so gracious with their time. And thanks to all of you for asking such thought-provoking questions. And thank you for encouraging me to have this conversation and to talk about it. And by the way, they are offering you 20% off their course. If you go to their website, I will link to all of that in the show notes. But if you want to purchase their course, 20% off with the code Paula. It's really, really helpful and will help you navigate these conversations even further. Okay, it is time for my takeaways. First and foremost, they need to hear it from us. They need to talk about these things with us. As Megan said, our kids need our voice on this topic. And even though it's uncomfortable, they need to be hearing these things from us, and always lead with empathy. I love that anecdote that she shared about kids at the lunch table talking about a nude or sharing a nude, and how she would have that conversation at the dinner table with her kids. And she said, instead of shying away from those topics, move toward them, and ask them questions. How did you feel about that? Let them hear your voice on the topic. Also, this conversation changes when your kids are older. I've shared with you, I have 2 teenagers and a 10-year-old. I'm really going through this right now, having 2 high schoolers, but reminding them that sex is an adult decision. How do you decide to do something that can be life-changing? And Mary Flo said, if you've been having multiple conversations, this is just going to be another one of those. And remind them that someone that loves them will also want to protect them. If they are in a loving relationship, someone that loves them will also want to protect them. And we know that there are emotional and physical ramifications and consequences that come with sex. And if it's super uncomfortable, have these conversations shoulder to shoulder or back to back. Like Mary Flo said, always involve something else. It's you and your child, and maybe it's the car, or maybe you're back to back. But the eye to eye is a little intimidating. So like she said, think of it as a triangle, something else is involved. I had this conversation with my son, Landon. I had my first sex talk with Landon in the car. And again, it will just be a series of conversations. Start with anatomically correct words for body parts. And then you can talk about seeds and eggs. That's the next step. And then the birth story. Maybe you have someone in your community that had a baby, and ask your kid, do you know how the baby got in there, how the baby got out of there, where it comes from? Let them see what's happening. And again, have the conversation in the car. Remember the triangle. It's you and your child and something else involved, or maybe it's shoulder to shoulder or it's back to back, because that eye to eye can be super uncomfortable. This is a series of talks. It is not perfection. It is about being purposeful, but have multiple conversations. And when it is appropriate, when your child is of an appropriate age, It might be powerful to share your past experiences, but like the lady said, you don't have to tell them every single detail. You can just say, I'm going to tell you what I learned from my past. When it comes to bathing, walking around the house naked, be mindful and respectful of the most modest person in the house. But hey, I think we could have a whole nother conversation about how we have over-sexualized our bodies here in America. What do you say? If you guys want to hear more about that, let me know. And remember, your kid isn't hearing the information the same way that you are. So as uncomfortable as it might be for you, as unforgettable and scarring and traumatic it might be for you to have this conversation, they're not hearing it the same way nor consuming it the same way, and they might not even really remember. So as we continue to have some tough conversations, politics and the sex talk in our bodies with our kids next week, we are going to talk about how we can effectively negotiate with our kids and our partners. And I have invited former FBI hostage negotiator Chris Voss to the show. So let's say you want your kid to go to bed on time. Maybe you want your kid to listen to better music or wear more modest clothes. Or maybe you want your partner to chip in a little bit more around the house. Chris Voss is here and he's going to help us effectively negotiate to maybe get what we want. And it's all in how we ask it. All right, we're going to keep talking about it. I hope you guys are enjoying these episodes. Again, you can always slide into my DMs to tell me what you want to talk about, and I'll see you right here next week. I know you guys thought you were done with me, but not quite yet. I have one more thing to tell you about. If you're watching on YouTube or you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, don't forget to subscribe to the show. I don't want you to miss a single beat or a single conversation. And remember, my DMs are always open. Tell me what you want to talk about.